Dale, and thank you to the Stanley Museum of Art for hosting us yet again this year for tonight's event. It is my privilege to introduce this year's Grant Wood Fellow in Printmaking, Ryan Parker. Ryan grew up in Florida and received his MFA in printmaking from the Tyler School of Art at Temple University in Rome and Philadelphia. In his printed works on paper and fabric, Ryan uses architectural drawings and motifs to explore psychological space. Also influenced by travel, he's participated in artist residencies in Frans Masriel Centrum in Belgium, Cork Printmakers in Ireland, and Ballinglen in Ireland as well. He was awarded the 2017-18 Fulbright Nehru Fellowship, which took him to India, which you'll hear about tonight. In addition to his artistic practice, Ryan has been working as a museum educator at the Fabric Workshop and Museum in Philadelphia, teaching textile design and screen printing in the postgraduate apprenticeship. However, this morning, I got to join Ryan as he taught Grant Wood Elementary School students up in Cedar Rapids, and he was teaching them how to screen print. This is 30 kids at a time, 30 fifth graders at a time that have no experience in this whatsoever, and it was fabulous to watch and experience with him. It is one of the three components that make up our Grant Wood colony, is this outreach and this engagement. And I'm just so pleased to have gotten to witness Ryan do this afternoon. Well, I think that you guys would have enjoyed his workshop. I have a feeling that tonight's presentation will be a little less messy. So please help me welcome Ryan.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming. I want to thank the Stanley Museum for having this talk tonight, and to thank the Grant Wood Art Colony. And I'd especially like to thank the printmaking department here at the University of Iowa. The faculty and graduate students have been so nice and welcoming, and I called this talk Surface Studies because I had to give it a title some months ago, and I thought it was generic enough to cover at least the surface of my work and experience. And but I'm also a printmaker, and I've taught and worked in textile design. So surface qualities like pattern, mark making, and layering are all things that are important to my work. And I'm starting with a work by Piranesi. He's really influenced me, and particularly his Carcieri series. I studied graphic design for my undergraduate degree in Florida, and I went for my MFA to Tyler School of Art for printmaking, and my first year was in Rome, Italy. And I'd never traveled abroad before, and it was a really exciting time for me. And in one of my free classes, we got to go to this print archive, and the archivist pulled out all these amazing etchings and engravings, and included were Piranesi's Carcieri series. Published in 1749, these works have been described as reflections of Piranesi's psychology. There is a feeling of ambiguity in relation to place, space, time, and memory. There's also a feeling of flux and transition, as if things are building and falling apart at the same time. And Carcieri, it means prisons in Italian, but the spaces that he created, the viewer doesn't feel locked up in them. Instead, they're spaces in which you kind of get lost finding your way through them. I felt connected to these works because I was in a foreign city. I was working through my MFA and kind of figuring things out, and so I thought that this idea of searching was kind of a metaphor for art making and for life in general. This is a piece that I did when I got back to Philadelphia. So my second year was in Philadelphia, and I wanted to create my own architecture. So I started using simple 1 and 2 point perspective to make drawings, and I wanted them to have the feeling of an etching, but I didn't know how to do etching at that point, and so I made these kind of hand drawings that I shot on the silk screens, and I used stencils, and the screen is kind of like a stamping tool, so they're kind of layered printed drawing hybrids. And here's an example of one of the pieces installed. They were also on Mylar, which is this translucent plastic material, and the architecture in which the piece was installed became a really important part of the work, and the wall behind it was showing through the piece. And the pieces were actually very textural. The layered silkscreen ink had the feeling of the embossment of an intaglio print. And I was thinking of them as being kind of like stills in a film. And when there were several of them installed, you kind of got different viewpoints and kind of like a broader, different viewpoints and moments in time. And I was interested in making the spaces chaotic spaces and ones that would confuse the viewer. So the walls and floors, you couldn't tell if they were solid or if you fall through them if you walked on them. This is my wavy wall here. And growing up, I was really into video games like a lot of kids are. And this is from a computer game called Myst. And it follows a man who wakes up on an island with no idea of where he is or how he got there. And so I was thinking of this format of these first-person video games and how you could use multiple images to create information about a bigger world. And this is an image from Frans Materiaal Centrum in Belgium, which is a printmaking residency, and it reminded me of Myst when I was there. And this is where I learned to do etching. So I, again, started making drawings with 1 and 2 point perspective, but I started using a 3D modeling program to kind of build the architecture and then use the images from there as like my sketchbook. And so I kind of create the spaces in the computer, and then I could walk through them virtually and take snapshots and make drawings from that. And to me, I liked how the etching referenced these old antique prints that I really liked. But since the imagery was sourced from a computer, it had a digital reference too. So I thought that had a kind of a funny tension and a conflation of time. In these etchings, the square image, it kind of looks just like a geometric abstraction, but then there's a chart below, and it has the world's tiniest screen print on it that's a little arrow that kind of points to an area of the chart to kind of show you your location and let you know that the image above is what you're looking at. And so I was playing with this idea of abstraction and figuration with these. And I wanted to create the feeling of the viewer physically being in the space, so I made kind of blew up some of the etchings and made them into large-scale drawings. So these are 10 by 10 feet. And they were this transfer paper drawings, so it's actually kind of like a giant monotype. What was interesting about it was when you draw on the transfer paper and you move it to another location, the past drawing kind of shows up as a ghost image in the newly drawn area. So it has kind of an interesting texture to it that I thought was pretty cool. And I was also playing around with animating the spaces. So this is just kind of like a 1 second loop, but it was made from 20 different etchings. And I showed this in a gallery before, kind of like you guys are seeing it, and people told me it was terrifying. So I'm sorry if this is freaking you out. And I thought was really cool about it is I like the foul biting is all the scratches and things that were etched into the plate is just kind of a part of the process, and it kind of gave the look of an old film. And this is another Piranesi. I thought this piece was pretty cool because when he moved his studio to the Spanish Steps in Rome, he wanted to advertise all the works that he had, so he made this etching broadsheet. And this was in the age before there were artist websites. So on this, he could list all of his different works, and he left a little space in the bottom corner, and he could fill in new series as he created them. And I liked the trompe l'oeil effect of the different pages layered on top of each other and the imagery behind, and how it reminded me of computer desktop with lots of windows open. And so I wanted to I feel like we spend a lot of time in that space of a computer screen, so I wanted to explore that idea, and so I made these etchings with these compositions that were taken from the open windows on my computer and different scenes from the architecture. And my drawing style is so linear, and it's like something I just can't get out of. When I did graphic design, I was in this program that was kind of in a transitional phase, and the teacher kind of taught us design from the 1970s. So French curves and technical pens and protractors and all those things, like drafting, drawing, really became stuck with me. So for better or worse, so I wanted these to be more tonal. So I'm playing around with the plate tone, which is when you wipe the plate, and you can leave a certain amount of tone behind. It's my wild zebra you can print. And this is a show that I did with the etchings, and then on the back wall was a wall drawing that was taken from etching texture and was drawn in graphite. And I did another artist residency in rural Ireland, and there were follies that were scattered around the countryside there. And a folly is a kind of a smaller scale building or a piece of architecture that's not functional, so it's like a decorative sculpture and like a little building combined. And the word folly also means foolishness or a lack of understanding. So I kind of started creating my own forms and reconfiguring them in different ways. And then I would pick a form and depict it, and then I had these windows that were kind of popping up that would show different viewpoints from the same form, so that the viewer could kind of get a broader view of what this piece looked like from different angles. And I was thinking of them kind of like proposals for something that would never be built. And I always work in series, as you can tell. Like I feel like one image kind of never really explores an idea completely for me. So, and I also like to see the groupings of the images together and their connections to each other. And before coming here to the University of Iowa, I was a museum educator at this place called the Fabric Workshop and Museum in Philadelphia. And it's a contemporary art museum and also a working studio. And it started in the 70s. So I learned 70s style printmaking, so 70s, it was inspired by print studio models such as Gemini Gel in LA and Marimekko in Finland. And at the time in the 70s that the workshop was created, there was a movement in art called the Pattern and Decoration movement, which was a revolt against the dominance and popularity of minimalism. And there were artists like Miriam Shapiro, Robert Kushner, and Betty Woodman, and they were invited to come to the Fabric Workshop for an artist residency to collaborate with master printers there and to make new work with screen printing and fabric. And a lot of these earlier works were additions too, so there were multiple pieces that could travel around and still be in the collection of the museum. And over time, printed textiles became clothing and functional objects, sculpture, and then eventually the definition of fabric itself expanded to include any materials that artists wanted to work with, including such unusual art materials as hog intestines in Miroslav Balka's work, dinosaur bones in Alora Calzadia's piece, and spider silk in Christine Borland's piece there. So now the work's looking minimal, right? As time went on. But in the image on the end, Christine Borland's work, she actually silked a spider. So they took these golden orb spiders and pulled the thread out of them, which I didn't know you could do that to a spider. And so they're actually they're golden threads. It's really beautiful. The first piece is Miroslav Balka's piece. It's made out of pig intestines, and the whole thing is kind of wrapped in a sheet of intestine lining, and then the inside is filled with these blown up balloons of kind of like long clown balloons that are inflated intestines. And one of the last times they showed this piece, the production manager was like, "Ryan, we have a job for you." They gave me a bucket of pig intestines and had me blow them up, which was as disgusting as it sounded. And my coworker was a vegetarian, so he didn't have to do it. And not all of the artwork at the Fabric Workshop is materials based. There's a lot of performance, whatever artists wanted to do there. So it was funny working there and being a museum educator because visitors would come in and they see it's a fabric workshop. They might just see it off the street and walk in and they're expecting to see working fabric, and instead they'll see Janine Antoni naked and rolling around on the gallery floor in paper, or these. There was one gallery that just had a rock hanging from the ceiling, and people would come and blow on the rock. And Ryan Scherkarten's like crazy video installations with trash furniture all around. So they were really confused and shocked and wanted to know where the quilts were at. And I would have to explain contemporary art to them. But yeah, fabric printing is still alive and well there. A lot of artists in residence still work with printmaking and textiles. There's also a big educational component to the museum, which is where I worked. And in grad school, I was introduced to the Fabric Workshop by joining their postgraduate apprenticeship program. So it's like a semester-long program where college grads get to work in the museum and make their own fabric prints. So they learn about large-scale fabric printing, get to work in the studios there. So this is a picture of the studio and some of the artists that I worked with. And you can see that it's a very collaborative process. The screens are so big that you can't physically do the printing yourself. There's huge squeegees that you need a partner to pass across the table to print. So yeah, it's a really fun program. And this is the pigment room here, where I spent a lot of time puffing fumes and probably will have long-term damage to my lungs. But this space here, we use these kind of strong concentrated liquid pigments, and then there's these different bases, and there's recipe books and mathematical equations to make the proper colors. And explaining math to artists was another challenge. And here's end of the term celebration here. We also have a high school program. I say we like I still work there. With the black and white prints are from the high school students, and then the colored prints are the college grads. And there's an exhibition of some of the banners at the museum. And it's a really great program. If you guys want to ask me about it, you're welcome to. And when I was working at the museum, I also met a contractor there who was a fashion designer, and she wanted to see what my drawings would look like on her clothing. So we started a collaboration with her brand Lobo Mau. And I did a lot of hand printing for her. I probably printed like thousands of yards. It was never enough, so I was always working away. And she's really interested in slow fashions. So when somebody wants a garment from her website, the fabric will then be printed, and it can be customized to the person buying it. And she still has her studio and hand prints everything. And it was interesting doing this because I find that people in general are kind of more interested in this work of mine than anything. I think it's one thing to have a print hanging on a wall, but when the drawing becomes a part of something that someone can wear, they have that personal attachment to it. It's like the work becomes a reflection of their identity because they chose the garment as a way to adorn their body and represent themselves. And in my works on paper, there's always like an absence of figures. So when it becomes a part of something that somebody wears, it activates the drawings in an interesting way. I learned a lot about women's clothing. This is a romper. And it's not practical. This is the same print, printed on different textiles and different colors, and they're gender neutral She started making menswear too. She never gave me anything. So. Back at the Fabric Workshop, we did a lot of public programming, and we brought in artists, writers, and critics to give lectures and do public workshops. And I learned about indigo dyeing from a shibori master named Yoshiko Wada and this French chemist named Michel Garcia, and they came to the museum for a workshop. And indigo is a really interesting dye because it has a transformative quality to it. When you dip it into the dye and you take it out, it's green, and then as oxygen hits it, it turns to blue. So I wanted to try to make some work with textiles, and I started working with indigo after that. And so I made these with this, it's like a resist paste that's made from cosmetic spa clay, so the kind of stuff, the green mask you put on. So that and gum arabic, you can make a print paste and print onto the fabric, and then when you dye it in indigo dye, the mud will resist the indigo from attaching to the fabric. So the white is the area where the clay was. And so I started working with motifs from the built environment around me in Philadelphia, both structural forms and surface details. So like doors, gates, tile work, bricks, painted walls, things like that became source material for the drawings. And I simplified the motifs and began layering the patterns. I was thinking of these as textiles as protective surfaces. And I heard Richard Tuttle talk at the Fabric Workshop about textiles. He's like a fabric collector and enthusiast, and he talked about how fabric is a concealing and revealing material. There's kind of a front and a back to it. There's an inside and an outside. And I was thinking about that idea and making these, having these forms that were kind of hiding and coming forward at the same time. And fabric, also when you wear it, you can conceal the body, but you can also kind of reflect something about yourself through the choice of color and shape and texture too. So this is a larger piece to work. All right, and last year I was a Fulbright scholar in India. That's me at a temple. I buzzed my head, and it wasn't a good idea. So the arts, architecture, and larger culture of India have fascinated me ever since I took an Indian art history class in my undergraduate degree. In the course, I was taken by the temple architecture that was completely covered in fine art and storytelling with elaborate ornamentation and patterning adorning the surfaces. Many of the structures themselves were made of elements, columns, arches, platforms, that were not only ornamented, but were duplicated and combined into larger forms in such a way that for me recalled the art of printmaking, the repetition, the intricate detail, and the narrative potential of all-over design. In further researching the topic, I was interested to find a correlation reflected in the language of Indian temple architecture and in printmaking. In the temples of South India, the inner room, the inner sanctum to the temple is a garbhagriha, or a womb chamber. And from that womb chamber, all of the duplicating elements of the temple kind of expand from there. So this is kind of Dravidian style temple architecture, and the early Indian architects, they use this repetition of form conceptually to build architecture that embodies ideas of cosmic birth and regeneration. And then intrinsic to the printmaking medium is the idea of multiples. So, and these multiples are created from a matrix, which is a screen, a copper plate, a lithographic stone. And with these, you can produce an infinite number of printed works of art or many identical images within a single printed work, with the word matrix translating from Latin to womb. And so this conceptual link was at the root of my desire to pursue architecture, printmaking, and pattern design in India. And so my project was to travel to areas of India, check out temples, and then learn about block printing. So it was as cool as it sounds. was really an adventure. This is an example here of some of the temple architecture, and then side by side with the block printing. And I was really interested in the degradation of the temples over time. They've been kind of destroyed and censored by invaders over the centuries, and then repaired. So they've kind of survived for centuries in various states. And I was based in a city called Bangalore, which is it's kind of famous in India for its horrible traffic, and it's kind of the tech hub of India. And people told me that I wouldn't find printmaking there, but I did. I was there. I was based there because I had connection to a friend and a school there, so that's kind of how I got there. But I started working at this block printing studio called Tarangini, and it's this family-run business. It's been around for 40 years. They're dedicated to retaining the tradition of block printing using sustainable practices, and there are master printers there that have been working for over 40 years. And they do hand printing for companies all over the world, including Anthropologie, West Elm, and they work with a lot of small boutique brands too. So you go to crazy Bangalore, it's like wild and loud and lots of traffic, construction, and then there's kind of like this wooded area nestled in the middle of the city with all these beautiful trees and monkeys jumping and beautiful fabrics hanging from clotheslines. So it's a really nice place. And they have a large library of wood blocks there. So these are some of the beautiful blocks that are there, and some of the prints. Designers can select the blocks, pick their own colors, and make their own combinations to create their own designs. And I like this idea of building a textile with blocks, and it kind of felt that way as you do the printing. And this is an example on the right of, so when I did my indigo prints, they were resist printing, but this is a discharge paste, so it's a fermented zinc. The fabric is blue first, and then you print this discharge paste, and when you steam it, the color is sucked out and becomes white again. And then let me see if I can get this to work. So this is an example of some printing. It's just like hand-eye coordination, just lining it up. You can watch Kristen Wiig videos now. Wait, how do I get back? All right. And so I learned about block printing at Tarangini, but then I wanted to learn how to actually carve the blocks. And everything in India just happened very organically, like learning about this block printing studio. And then I asked the woman at the block printing studio if she knew of a carver, and of course she did, because she works with him. So she gave me this guy's number and told me to call him, and I called him, and yeah, he didn't really speak English, and he just said, just come. So I'm like, okay. So I showed up. This is his printing studio on the, sorry, his carving studio on the left. He's kind of like the only block carver in Bangalore. Most of the block carving and printing is done in the north of India. But there are like a few guys that work there. The doors are always open because the weather is always perfect in Bangalore. And then on the right, these are the teak wood blocks that they carve into. And this is an example of a block in progress. So a designer gave them this really intricate gridded drawing here. And, this is, I don't know, these blocks are about 8 inches around, and you can see the extremely intricate work that they can do with these little chisels and chipping away. And this is a really gorgeous block that's in progress. The teak wood is kind of coated with this lime solution, paint or whatever, and then they draw on the design and start carving into it. And these are the tools, and then this is me with my sad little block. They drew a little flower pot for me and told me to, to carve it. And it's really hard, and it's very uncomfortable because I guess as Westerners, we don't really crouch that much. So I had to like crouch in a really uncomfortable position. My back was killing me. I had Charlie horses in my legs. Like, I was really struggling the first few days. I worked there for a few weeks and was just chipping away these blocks. The teaching style there is very harsh. I got yelled at a lot, and there's a language barrier. But they were really patient with me and really cool. And let's see. Oh, let's go back. Oh, I'm supposed to click here. Sorry, another YouTube video. All right, so this is my friend. He's kind of showing off. He's making my flower pot look better by adding all this detail to it. You use this piece of wood and you just kind of clink away. It makes it look really easy. It's really hard. Okay. Okay. Okay, so another thing that I wanted to learn when I was there was this process called kalamkari. And this is, I think, a sari fabric that's on silk. And it's kind of a tradition, I think, that's in South India. And it's painting with natural dyes directly onto fabric. So you can see all the crazy detail. There's mythology and stories that are on these textiles. And so I asked around again, and one of the professors at the art school told me to call this guy. So she gave me a phone number. I called this guy, and this old man answered the phone, and he didn't really speak English, and so he was just like, okay, just come. So he was actually in another city that was far away, so I booked a flight, and I went, and I found him. And his name is Prabhakar, and he's like, oh, you came. So so he, I worked with him for like a week in his studio. There were 2 women working there. They did the painting, and there was a guy that was kind of an illustrator who was working there. And he was showing me how to do the drawing. There's a lot of things that are kind of just standard ways of creating the imagery, and so it's very kind of stylized. He's like, this is how you draw a person, you know, this is how you draw this motif. So it was kind of a step-by-step process. And kalamkari, it's like the fabric is it's kind of dyed first in this plant dye called mirabellum, and it's soaked in milk. And the milk is so when you paint, I guess there's fats in it so that the liquid doesn't expand that much. And on the left, that's the column. So the column is a pen, and it's a bamboo skewer, and it has wool wrapped around it, and then thread wrapped around that. And that's an iron mordant, so it's just rust water in that container. So you dip the pen in the rust water, and then you squeeze the wool, and it oozes down the tip of the pen to make the drawing. Here's another video. So I'm just showing you it's kind of like transparent when it first goes on, and then as the mordant attaches to the plant dye, it changes to black. The opposite of disappearing ink. Again, this is really hard, working with this pen. These are some beautiful examples that are not mine. They're just ones I saw in the museum, but that's kind of what's possible. And then I just want to show you guys some other crafts that I saw in India that were interesting. This one is called palm leaf painting, but it's not painting at all. It's kind of like an etching. There's these palm leaves that are dried out, and they're cut into strips and glued to a piece of fabric, and it folds up like an accordion fold into a little scroll. But you take this etching needle, which is so beautiful, and I tried to get one, and nobody would sell me one, and carve into the dried leaves, and then rub ink into the grooves. So just like intaglio, but it doesn't get printed. This is called Rengoli, and it was just kind of all over the place. It's usually the woman of the house. This is kind of a daily ritual where she'll come out and use rice flour and make a drawing every day, and it's kind of a good luck thing. It lets blessings into the home, so it's in the entryway of the house. And these are cow dung sculptures. There's lots of cow poop everywhere. So there was like an old couple that was making these, and they sculpt them into different animals and gods and things, and let them bake in the sun, and then paint them, and they're kind of like toys for kids. And I met a lot of people. I think I was really stood out as a foreigner. So this is just like one afternoon of people wanting to take selfies with me. Indians love selfies. The guy at the top's giving me a thumbs down, so it's rude. And the guy all the way on the left with the red hat, he called me uncle, which means like elder, and I was really upset about that. I'm like, dude, I think we're the same age. So, so that brings me to Iowa. I've been experimenting with natural dyes here, and so these are some of the samples that I've been working with. And these are different mordants that were made into print paste and printed onto different fabrics and dyed into different plant dyes. So some of the same ones that were used in the kalamkari in India. And I built a little mini printing table here, so it's kind of like the one based on the one at the Fabric Workshop. And I stretched a bunch of big screens too, and so this is like available to students here after I leave. I tried getting into block printing and carving here, and I thought I could do it with the laser cutters and things that are the technology that's here, but I found that it does not work that way. Like even after using the laser cutter, there's still a lot of hand carving that had to be done, and I did not get good enough during my time learning with artisans. So I haven't been able to do that. So I've mostly been concentrating on screen printing here. This is my quilt that I printed with the mordants and dyed the fabric in natural dyes. And I learned to make a quilt at home ec here. My teacher Cody is here. And yeah, it was a really great course. So I think being in Iowa kind of made me think of quilting, and quilts are made out of quilting blocks, so it was another kind of connection to block printing and the blocks of these temples. So yeah, and thinking about constructing a textile, quilting became something that I've been experimenting with. And yeah, so I think I'm still kind of working away here. I've got a couple more months, and just kind of still searching and figuring the work out. And so yeah, it's really been an honor to be here. And yeah, thanks so much for coming and hearing my talk. You guys have any questions? Oh, yeah.
For your indigo dye pieces, you were talking about mixing the gum arabic to kind of make this resistant paste.
Yeah.
I'm a little curious about that process. You have these different tones of that indigo color on the page. Are you kind of layering the dye? You like laying down resist and then dyeing and then laying down another resist and dyeing again? Is it similar to etching in that way?
It was like it was a 3-part recipe. So there was clay, gum arabic, and Epsom salts, and so I started experimenting with using different proportions of things. So when I could use different pastes and print it, and when I dyed in the dye, sometimes the dye would penetrate some of the weaker paste that I made, so I could get multiple colors or shades in one dye. But then I could also put it back in the dye again and print more onto it and layer it in that way. So.
For your fabric pieces, even the same ones, the indigo, are those things that are hung on the wall, or those always end up as objects, or? Yeah,
there were things that are hung on the wall. Yeah. I know. I have it. I kind of don't know really how to sew. I mean, except for making a quilt or whatever. But I don't like, as far as the fashion stuff I've done. It's been a collaboration with people so that know how to do that. So yeah, I like working with people with textiles, because it's one thing to make a textile, but then what can you do with it? So so many different possibilities. Yep.
When's your opening for your exhibition?
It's May 5th in Cedar Rapids.
Oh,
May 2nd? Okay. Don't oh. Okay. Through June 30th. Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, guys.